Welcome to Washington today on C-SPAN Radio for Monday, April 21st, 2025. Flags are flying at half-staff in the U.S. in memory of Pope Francis, who has died at the age of 88. President Donald Trump and other political leaders will reflect on the legacy of the man called the People's Pope. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth calls the New York Times story claiming he shared sensitive military attack information in a second unsecure chat on the Signal app, anonymous smears. President Trump standing by the secretary, top Democrats in Congress calling for the secretary to resign. 4 U.S. House Democrats traveled to El Salvador to call for the release and return to the U.S. of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, who was deported by the Trump administration accused of gang membership. They say their request to see him has been denied. Supreme Court hears a case challenging a task force in the Health and Human Services Department that decides preventive health services that must be covered by private insurance under the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare. Stocks falling again over concerns about tariffs, and President Trump today demanding the Federal Reserve cut interest rates immediately, calling the Fed Chair Jerome Powell a loser. The Dow down 971. And former President Bill Clinton attends a ceremony marking the 30th anniversary of the deadly Oklahoma City terrorist bombing, calling for unity, what he calls the Oklahoma Standard. USA Today writes that Pope Francis, 88 years old, a humble reformer who sought to make the Catholic Church more inclusive and clashed with world leaders over the rights of immigrants, died Easter Monday following a lengthy bout of double pneumonia, the Vatican said. Cardinal Kevin Farrell, who oversees the Pope's affairs, announced the death from Casa Santa Marta, where Francis lived at the Vatican. Francis died of a stroke and irreversible heart failure, the Vatican doctors said in a death certificate released Monday. That was from USA Today. President Donald Trump posting on Truth Social, "Rest in peace, Pope Francis. May God bless him and all who loved him." And later posting, "Melania and I will be going to the funeral of Pope Francis in Rome. We look forward to being there." The president spoke today about Pope Francis's legacy on the balcony of the White House as he addressed the families assembled on the White House lawn for the traditional Easter egg roll. Standing beside him, the First Lady, Melania Trump, and the Easter Bunny.
Well, thank you very much, everybody, and a very happy Easter to everyone. It was a beautiful day yesterday, and it's a beautiful day today. We don't have to worry about sunburn, but looks like it's not going to be raining. It's going to be really something special. 40,000, 42,000 people are expected all throughout the day, and it's an honor to have you. I just signed an executive order putting the flags of our country, all of them, all federal flags and state flags, at half-mast in honor of Pope Francis. So he was a good man, worked hard. He loved the world, and it's an honor to do that. I want to thank everybody for being here. This is some band. I've heard this band actually indirectly for 4 years and very directly now for 4.5. And I like the direct method even better. But the Marine Corps Band is very, very special. Thank you very much. What a great job. Thank you. Thank you. I also want to thank the National Park Service, the job they do in making everything so beautiful and spiffy. And I'm very difficult when it comes to that. I will tell you, very, very difficult. And I say they have done an incredible job. You just have to look around and see. And I just want to give a special thank you to our great First Lady who organized this entire event. She worked very, very hard on it. She worked very hard. I said, "What are you doing?" She said, "I'm working on the egg roll." I said, "That sounds like a lot of fun." And we're going to have a lot of fun in just a couple of minutes. But again, our country is doing very well. We had the highest number of recruits, enlistments that we've had in, I think, 28 or 29 years, and I'm sure we're going to actually beat that number. It's all happened since November 5th. It's all happened. Enrollment in the military is at a record, and enrollment in the police force, fire forces, and all of the different law enforcement groups. We're setting records, and 6 months ago we couldn't get anybody. And now we're setting records. That's sort of testament to what's happening in terms of the spirit of our country. We love our country, and it's been something very, very special. And speaking of special, Easter is special, and it's one of our favorite days. It's one of our favorite periods of time. We're honoring Jesus Christ, and we're going to honor Jesus Christ very powerfully throughout our lives, all throughout our lives, not just now, all throughout our lives. We're bringing religion back in America. We're bringing a lot of things back, but religion is coming back to America. That's why you see the kind of numbers that you're seeing, the spirit and the kind of numbers that you're seeing. So we're going to come down and join you right now. But I just want to wish everybody once again, happy Easter and enjoy your lives. We're going to have a great 4 years. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you.
President Donald Trump at the White House at the start of the Easter egg roll. After these remarks, he and the First Lady went down the steps from the balcony to the lawn. And Associated Press writing, the President and First Lady visited the egg roll area where he blew a gold-toned whistle stamped with the presidential seal to start a few races. They also spent time at a station where kids wrote cards to service members. Melania Trump later read Bunny with a Big Heart at a reading area. That was from AP. But before they got to that, the president did take a couple of questions from reporters, and one was on the passing of Pope Francis.
Your message to Catholics, sir, mourning the loss of Pope Francis. Your message to Catholics, sir.
We love you all. We're with you all. They were with me during the election, as you know, very strongly, and it's just an honor to have the support of the Catholics, and I feel very badly for them because they love the Pope.
No matter who the next Pope is, sir, no matter who the next Pope is elected, whoever that may be, what relationship do you hope to have with the incoming Pope?
I think very good. I've had that, but I think very good.
President Donald Trump on the White House lawn at the Easter egg roll, getting reporters questions about the passing of Pope Francis. Vice President J.D. Vance met the Pope on Easter Sunday and has now continued his overseas trip with his family to India. Vice President posting on X this morning, I just learned of the passing of Pope Francis. My heart goes out to the millions of Christians all over the world who loved him. I was happy to see him yesterday, though he was obviously very ill. I'll always remember him for the homily he gave in the very early days of COVID. It was really quite beautiful. May God rest his soul. Former President Joe Biden putting out a post, it is with great sadness that Jill and I learned of the passing of His Holiness Pope Francis. He was unlike any who came before him. Pope Francis will be remembered as one of the most consequential leaders of our time, and I am better for having known him. For decades, he served the most vulnerable across Argentina, and his mission of serving the poor never ceased. Cardinal Timothy Dolan, Archbishop of New York, who is eligible to vote in the upcoming conclave for the next pope, spoke to reporters at St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City after the morning mass.
If you could talk about his stewardship and what he meant to Catholics and what he brought to the papacy.
I love that word, stewardship. Thanks for using it. Stewardship means we're aware, gratefully aware of the gifts that God has given us, humbly aware, and we try to use them to the best of our ability. And he was a wonderful steward of the gifts that God gave him. I remember right after I was there in 2013 at the conclave when we elected him, and when we all left after he had blessed the crowd, and we went over the Doma Santa Marta for lunch, and obviously he did the opening prayer, but before, he's looking out at all of us and he says, God forgive you for what you did. Or so there was a humility and a sense of humor there from the beginning. Those were gifts that he had. He'd be the first to admit, you know, when you think of the towering intellects of John Paul II and Benedict XVI, he'd be the first to admit that perhaps the abundant gifts that God had given him were evident elsewhere, in his simplicity, in his humility, in his easygoingness. These were gifts that he stewarded so well. But yet, here's a biggie too. He taught us at the end by allowing us to watch him die. He taught us that who we are is more important than what we can do. He couldn't do much. He could barely raise his hand yesterday, did you see? He could barely speak. He couldn't do much, but what he was, as a child of God, created in God's image and likeness, destined for all eternity, given the high office of the successor of Peter. What he was so much more important than what he could do, all right? He did a lot, believe me, but in those final months, I think that's when he had the most eloquent pulpit ever. So, thanks.
Cardinal Timothy Dolan, Archbishop of New York, speaking to reporters at St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York City. Former Vice President Kamala Harris with a statement. Pope Francis was a visionary leader who dedicated his life to service and justice. He encouraged us to protect our planet, championed a more inclusive church, and cared for all of God's children, especially the most vulnerable among us. Doug and I pray for His Holiness, and we join people around the world in mourning his loss. And U.S. House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican of Louisiana, writing, "Today our prayers are with all those mourning the passing of Pope Francis. As the leader of the Catholic Church, he impacted the lives of countless people across the globe. May he rest in peace." There are about 60 million Catholics in the United States, out of the 1.4 billion worldwide. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres made a statement at the UN in New York City.
I want to extend my deepest condolences to Catholics and all those around the world inspired by the extraordinary life and example of His Holiness Pope Francis. Pope Francis was a messenger of hope, humility, and humanity. He was a transcendent voice for peace, human dignity, and social justice. He leaves behind a legacy of faith, service, and compassion for all, especially those on the margins of life or trapped by the horrors of conflict. Pope Francis was a man of faith for all faiths, working with people of all beliefs and backgrounds to light a path forward. Through the years, we at United Nations were greatly inspired by his commitment to the goals and ideals of our organization, a message I was honored to convey in my meetings with him as Secretary General. Pope Francis also understood that protecting our common home is at heart a deeply moral mission, a responsibility that belongs to every person. Many of us find great meaning in his final Easter message delivered just yesterday. He appealed for us not to yield, as he called it, to the logic of fear. Instead, he urged the world to invest in what he referred to as the weapons of peace, to help the most vulnerable, to fight hunger, to advance development. Our divided and discordant world will be a much better place if we follow his example of unity and mutual understanding in our own actions. Thank you.
United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres making that statement at the UN in New York City today. More reaction. U.S. House Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi, Democrat of California, writing, "It is with immense sadness that Paul and I join our fellow Catholics and people of faith around the world in mourning the loss of His Holiness Pope Francis, a beacon of charity, hope, and love for all the people of faith. He rekindled the faith of Catholics worldwide with a triumphant message of peace that has inspired a generation." And from former U.S. House Speaker John Boehner, Republican of Ohio, "Speaker, will you pray with me? With those words, Pope Francis changed my life. He will forever hold a place in America's history as the first pope to address a joint meeting of the U.S. Congress and in hearts across the world for his compassionate stewardship of the Church." That address to Congress is in C-SPAN's video library at cspan.org, runs a little over an hour. Here's a minute of it from 2015.
There is another temptation which we must especially guard against. The simplistic reductionism which sees only good or evil, or, if you will, the righteous and sinners. The contemporary world, with its open wounds, which affect so many of our brothers and sisters, demands that we confront every form of polarization, which would divide it into these two camps. We know that in the attempt to be fit of enemy without, we can be tempted to feed the enemy within, to imitate the hatred and violence of tyrants and murderers is the best way to take their place. That is something which you, as people, reject.
Pope Francis addressing a joint meeting of Congress in 2015. Vatican announcing this morning the Pope has died at the age of 88. Euronews with an article on the process for electing the next Pope. They write after a 9-day mourning period and funeral for Pope Francis, the Catholic Church will arrange the next conclave. The mysterious process, which is not open to the public, will take place in the Sistine Chapel in Vatican City. Here, the College of Cardinals will gather to elect the Church's next head. The rules, as of January 22nd, 2025, state there are 138 electors out of 252 cardinals. Only those under the age of 80 may take part in the secret ballot. 4 rounds of voting take place daily until one cardinal receives a 2/3 majority of the vote. The process typically lasts 15 to 20 days. That was from Euronews. And there's an Associated Press article on possible contenders with this. The idea of an American pope has long been taboo, given the geopolitical power already wielded by the United States. But the Chicago-born Cardinal Robert Prevost, 69 years old, could be a first. He has an extensive experience in Peru, first as a missionary and then as archbishop, and he is currently prefect of the Vatican's powerful dicastery for bishops in charge of vetting nominations for bishops around the world. That was from AP. This is Washington Today. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and President Donald Trump are reacting to Sunday's New York Times article that begins, Secretary Hegseth shared detailed information about forthcoming strikes in Yemen on March 15th in a private Signal group chat that included his wife, brother, and personal lawyer, according to 4 people with knowledge of the chat. Some of those people said that the information Mr. Hegseth shared on the Signal chat included the flight schedules for the FA-18 Hornets targeting the Houthis in Yemen, essentially the same attack plans that he shared on a separate Signal chat the same day that mistakenly included the editor of The Atlantic. That was from the New York Times on Sunday. Secretary Hegseth spoke to reporters on the White House lawn before the start of the Easter egg roll.
What do you want to say, sir, about the Signal chat controversy?
You know, what a big surprise that a few leakers get fired and suddenly a bunch of hit pieces come out from the same media that peddled the Russia hoax. Won't give back their Pulitzers. They got Pulitzers for a bunch of lies. Pulitzers for a bunch of lies. And on hoaxes, time and time and time again. And as they peddle those lies, no one ever calls them on it. See, this is what the media does. They take anonymous sources from disgruntled former employees, and then they try to slash and burn people and ruin their reputations. Not going to work with me, because we're changing the Defense Department, putting the Pentagon back in the hands of warfighters, and anonymous smears from disgruntled former employees on old news doesn't matter. So I'm happy to be here at the Easter egg roll with my dad and my kids, because, you know, this is what we're doing it for. These kids right here. This is why we're fighting the fake news media. This is why we're fighting slash and burn Democrats. This is why we're fighting hoaxsters. So this group, this group right here, full of hoaxsters that peddle anonymous sources from leakers with access to grind, and then you put it all together as if it's some news story. And when we know exactly what it is. So I'm really proud of what we're doing for the president, fighting hard across the board, and I'm going to go roll some Easter eggs with my kids. Thank you very much.
Have you spoken to the president?
Have spoken to the president, and we are going to continue fighting on the same page all the way.
All right, we're moving, everyone. We're moving. Let's go.
Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth on the White House lawn with reporters before the start of the Easter egg roll. Pentagon Press Secretary Sean Parnell put out a statement Sunday following the New York Times article that begins, "The New York Times and all other fake news that repeat their garbage are enthusiastically taking the grievances of disgruntled former employees as the sole sources for their article. They relied only on the words of people who were fired this week and appeared to have a motive to sabotage the secretary and the president's agenda. There was no classified information in any Signal chat, no matter how many ways they try to write the story. That was from the Pentagon Press Secretary Sean Parnell. Also on the White House lawn, President Donald Trump asked about this story.
Do you remain confident in Pete Hegseth?
Oh, totally.
President Trump.
Why do you even ask a question like that? We have recruitments that's at an all-time high. The spirit in the armed forces is fantastic. No, great confidence.
President Trump, we saw your message about Secretary Hegseth using Signal to discuss those military plans.
Are you bringing up Signal again? I thought they gave that up 2 weeks ago.
There was a new report this weekend that he used it in a separate chat that included some family members.
It's all just the same old stuff from the media. That's an old one. Try finding something new.
President Donald Trump with reporters on the White House lawn as the Easter egg roll was getting underway. The Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, posting, "The details keep coming out. We keep learning how Pete Hegseth put lives at risk, but Trump is still too weak to fire him. Pete Hegseth must be fired." And Senator Mark Warner, Democrat of Virginia, the Intelligence Committee vice chair, was interviewed on this on CNN today.
This is a guy that's in so far over his head that it, he didn't say anything there about denying that he did this gross, sloppy misuse of classified information, sharing now with his family members. We heard about the misuse earlier when this information was shared with other senior members of the administration. It is way past time that Hegseth should either quit or be fired. And I think the question is going to be, will my Republican Senate friends, who I know care about our national security, how many more examples of chaos at the Pentagon before they will find their voice and be willing to step up and speak out on the fact that this guy should no longer be Secretary of Defense?
You know the intelligence community, you know intelligence. How serious, Senator, was this breach compared to other cases of highly classified information being mishandled?
Well, let me give you the best example. I was down a couple of weeks ago down in Virginia Beach. I had a big town hall. Many of the people at the town hall knew people that were on the Truman, which is the aircraft carrier that launched these attacks, or the planes that were launched from the aircraft carrier against the Houthis. They knew members on the Truman. They were outraged because they knew if that information had got out, their loved ones could have been, frankly, put in harm's way in an awful, awful way. So this is such an obvious case of sloppiness, carelessness, not respect for classified information. And this is what is happening, I fear, all across the IC, is this group of individuals come in, try to politicize our intelligence, and frankly, in many cases, have put leadership in place that's incompetent.
Senator Mark Warner, Democrat of Virginia, Intelligence Committee vice chair, today on CNN. And Associated Press reporting out of Dubai, United Arab Emirates, U.S. airstrikes targeting Yemen's capital killed 12 people and wounded 34 others, the Houthi rebels said early Monday. The deaths mark the latest in America's intensified campaign of strikes against the rebels. That was from AP. From USA Today, 4 House Democrats travel to El Salvador to demand the return of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, a Maryland man wrongly deported to the Central American country in what the White House initially acknowledged was an administrative error. Robert Garcia, Democrat of California, Maxwell Frost, Democrat of Florida, Yasmin Ansari, Democrat of Arizona, and Maxine Dexter, Democrat of Oregon, landed in El Salvador early April 21st. According to a news release, the lawmakers will meet with officials at the U.S. Embassy there to advocate for Abrego Garcia's release and to inquire about other men in El Salvador who were transferred from the United States, according to a source familiar with the plans. That was from USA Today. 2 of the House members posted videos from El Salvador.
Hi everyone, this is Congresswoman Yasmin Ansari. After a long day, we have arrived in El Salvador. I am here with several of my colleagues to demand that Donald Trump release Kilmar Abrego Garcia, union member, Maryland man who was wrongfully detained and deported, has never been convicted of a crime, and who the United States Supreme Court has ruled 9-0 unanimously the United States must facilitate his return. Last night, I had a town hall in my district where a woman came and said her son, who is Salvadoran, they are scared to travel this summer because what if what happened to Kilmar Garcia happens to them? If there's not due process for Kilmar, there will be no due process for anyone. We want to make sure that Kilmar is still alive. We want to make sure that he has access to counsel. We want to make sure that the United States does what it's supposed to do, follow the Supreme Court of the United States and release him. And we are here fighting for the future of our democracy.
Congresswoman Maxine Dexter here, coming to you from El Salvador. I flew here last night with 3 of my colleagues to demand that Kilmar Abrego Garcia be released. He is being held in violation of a Supreme Court order expressly telling the Trump administration to effectuate and facilitate his coming home. That is being ignored. This is not just a threat to all people in the United States who could be illegally abducted, detained, and transported internationally against their will, but it is a fact that our president does not recognize the branches of government and the balances of power. This is what we all have been calling a constitutional crisis, yet it is more severe than anything we've seen. We cannot stay silent. We must stay loud. I am here because I refuse to wait for something to happen. We are here to release Kilmar Abrego Garcia.
Videos from 2 of the 4 House Democrats traveling to El Salvador. They had initially requested that it be an official congressional delegation or CODEL, but that request was denied by the House Oversight Committee Chair James Comer, Republican of Kentucky. And Maxwell Frost of Florida writing today, Chair Comer denied our request for an official trip to El Salvador to advocate for due process and the return of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. Pretty shameful. Good thing I don't need Comer's permission to get on a plane. And this trip comes after Senator Chris Van Hollen, Democrat from Maryland, went to El Salvador last week and met with Kilmar Abrego Garcia. The 4 House Democrats holding a news conference today saying that they have so far been denied access to Abrego Garcia. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt talked about these efforts on Fox News Channel this morning.
They should know the truth about this man. He is an illegal alien, a foreign terrorist, and a criminal MS-13 gang member who violated our country's laws by coming here in the first place. And shame on Senator Chris Van Hollen and the entire Democrat Party, who wasted Easter Sunday going on every television show in the country to advocate for the return of an illegal criminal gang member. There is a litany of evidence proving this individual's ties to MS-13 that has been confirmed in 2 different courts. There have been multiple law enforcement officers who have affirmed his MS-13 gang affiliation, and this is who the Democrat Party is advocating for. It is ridiculous. The president, this White House, the entire administration will continue to focus on deporting these illegal alien gang members and criminals from our nation's interior and enforcing our country's immigration laws. That's what the president was reelected to do. And I would add that the overwhelming majority of Americans continue to support the deportation of illegal criminals. A recent CBS poll showed that 89% of the American people support deporting illegal criminals from our homeland. So the president will continue to do that while Democrats continue to trip over themselves, while ignoring American citizens whose lives have been forever impacted by the actions and the crimes of these illegal criminals, like Patty Morin, who we were so honored to have at the White House to share her daughter's story just last week. Senator Van Hollen has never called her, has never reached out to her family, yet he has spent hours now fawning over this illegal alien who is tied to a vicious gang that has taken the lives of American citizens.
White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt this morning on Fox News Channel. Reuters has an article. El Salvador President Nayib Bukele on Sunday proposed sending 252 Venezuelans deported from the U.S. and imprisoned in his country to Venezuela in exchange for taking, quote, political prisoners held by Venezuela. Washington Today continues in a moment.
The weekly podcast is a unique offering from C-SPAN. We record it right here in the C-SPAN radio studios in beautiful downtown Capitol Hill. In a town where extremes get so much attention, this isn't more extreme opinion, it's extreme history, connecting the old with the new. Hear what's happening right now against the backdrop of the history you know. So listen, follow, and enjoy the C-SPAN Radio podcast, The Weekly. And have friends and family who love political history and even love C-SPAN's coverage of politics? Tell them about it too. Find C-SPAN's The Weekly wherever you get podcasts.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you find your podcasts. A few more headlines from the New York Times. Nadine Menendez was convicted on Monday of participating in a complex bribery conspiracy with her husband, Robert Menendez, a former senator from New Jersey, who last year was also found guilty of trading his political influence for gold, cash, and a Mercedes-Benz convertible. And from The Hill, the Department of Education announced Monday it will restart collections on defaulted federal student loans on May 5th, including potentially garnishing wages for millions of workers. Majority of Supreme Court justices on Monday morning, writes the Washington Examiner, appeared highly skeptical of a Christian business's argument against the constitutionality of the panel that chooses which preventive services Obamacare covers. The case heard Monday, Braidwood v. Kennedy, revolves around the constitutionality of the Preventive Services Task Force, an independent panel that recommends preventive care measures that insurers must cover at no cost to beneficiaries. Braidwood Management, a Texas Christian-owned business, argued that the task force members ought to be construed as primary officers, meaning it is unconstitutional for them to be appointed by the Secretary of Health and Human Services as they are today. Instead, they should be subject to presidential appointment and Senate confirmation under the Appointment Clause of the Constitution. Trump administration, which took up a similar argument to the Biden administration, contended that the task force members are instead inferior officers and merely carry out the authority of the Health and Human Services Secretary, since the Secretary has appointment and removal power over them. That was from the Washington Examiner. Here's some of the oral argument. Justice Samuel Alito questioning Hashim Mupan, Principal Deputy Solicitor General.
If Congress really wanted these task force members to do the bidding of the Secretary, isn't that an incredibly odd way to go about conferring that authority?
No, because critically, we are not saying that Congress wanted the task force to do the Secretary's bidding. We agree that the Secretary cannot tell the task force to make a given recommendation. If the task force doesn't want to make a recommendation, it doesn't have to make a recommendation. Our point is simply that if the task force does make a recommendation, the Secretary can block it. It's, to use an analogy, it's like bicameralism. The Senate can't force the House to pass a bill. But if the Senate doesn't also agree with the bill, it doesn't become a law.
Well, under the argument that you've just made, why can't the Secretary demand that a particular recommendation be made using exactly the same authority that you just outlined? What am I missing? The President says, I want you to make this recommendation. And if you don't make this recommendation, I'm going to remove you and replace you with somebody who will make the recommendation.
So he can remove them, but we don't think he has the ability to force them to make the recommendation, because we do think that the phrase independence, and more importantly, the phrase the recommendations made shall be independent in 299B4A6, we do think that that language does prevent that. And that makes perfect sense. If you take a step back and think about the statutory scheme, Congress was, as it often does, balancing competing objectives. On the one hand, it wanted the benefits of an expert body. It wanted recommendations that reflected their best scientific judgment. But on the other hand, it recognized that you need to have political accountability. And so the Secretary can block it. And that solves the problem. It means that no final decision can be made that binds the public unless the Secretary approves it.
Hashim Mupan, Principal Deputy U.S. Solicitor General, at today's Supreme Court oral argument questioned by Justice Samuel Alito. The attorney for Braidwood Management, which brought this challenge to the U.S. Preventive Services Task Force at HHS, is Jonathan Mitchell, here questioned by Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson.
So the test for principal officer status is whether the officer in question is directed and supervised in his decision-making. On the government's reading of Section 299B-4A6, if the court were to adopt that view, the Secretary would have the ability to overrule task force decisions to confer A or B ratings on preventive care. But the Secretary would not have any authority to overrule the task force.
But why is that? Why is that? I mean, the year they make a recommendation and they have rejected other recommendation or other options. The Secretary puts into place the interval period, reviews what they did and didn't do, and says, I'm going to remove you. As a result, I don't like what you did or didn't do, and you're out.
That doesn't make them into inferior officers, and Arthrex holds as much, because Arthrex acknowledges situations in which a principal officer can, through informal means, influence the decision-making of a subordinate official. And Arthrex says that's still not good enough. There has to be a formal authority to review the decisions that are being made.
But what about all the adjudicatory cases? Mr. Mupon says this is more like Edmonds. This is independent in the sense that people are making recommendations using their own best judgment, but they're still at-will removable, and we found that is okay.
But they also have all their decisions subject to review by a principal officer. What this court said in Edmond was that the reason those judges were deemed inferior was because they could not issue any final decision on behalf of the United States without being allowed to do so by a principal officer.
Attorney Jonathan Mitchell being questioned by Supreme Court Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson during the oral argument in today's case, Kennedy v. Braidwood Management, on the constitutionality of the U.S. Preventive Services Task Force, part of the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare. A Vox News article reads, this body has exercised its authority to mandate coverage of a wide range of treatments, from cancer screenings to drugs that prevent transmission of the HIV virus to eye ointments that prevent infections that cause blindness in infants. Article also has this: Republican Justices Brett Kavanaugh and Amy Coney Barrett both seem inclined to vote against Jonathan Mitchell, although their questions did leave some uncertainty about how they would ultimately rule in this case. All three of the court's Democrats appeared all but certain to uphold the PSTF, so that means there may be at least 5 votes to preserve health insurers' obligations under Obamacare. Reporting from Vox. Wall Street today, the Dow down 971, NASDAQ down 415, S&P down 124. And today's losses come as President Donald Trump again criticized the Fed Chair Jerome Powell, writing on Truth Social, preventive cuts in interest rates are being called for by many, with energy costs way down, food prices, including Biden's egg disaster, substantially lower, and most other things trending down. There is virtually no inflation. With these costs trending so nicely downward, just what I predicted they would do, there can be almost no inflation, but there can be a slowing of the economy unless Mr. Too Late, a major loser, lowers interest rates now. Chair Powell warned last week that the tariffs that President Trump has imposed would create a challenging scenario by putting the central bank's 2 main goals, stable inflation and a healthy labor market, in tension. Story from CNBC, President Donald Trump will meet Monday afternoon with executives from some of the nation's biggest retailers as his aggressive and unpredictable tariffs threaten to upend their import-heavy business models. Trump is set to host top officers from Walmart, Target, Home Depot, and Lowe's at the White House to discuss the impact of his trade policies, an administration official told CNBC. Another story from CNBC, China on Monday warned it will retaliate against countries that cooperate with the U.S. in ways that compromise Beijing's interests as the trade war between the world's 2 largest economies threatens to embroil other nations. Again, from CNBC. The Treasury Department is recognizing April as National Financial Literacy Month, and today, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent posted a series of short videos.
Everyone should care about financial literacy, whether you are a student with a summer job or a part-time job during school, whether you're in college, whether you're starting your career, or whether you are at the end of your career. Making good financial choices creates economic security, and look, it's fun. You learn about the markets, you learn how to properly allocate resources, and there's a big payoff over the long term for something you can do early in your career. When you think about the long arc of your life and your career, then obviously you're worried about your education, your job, your housing, but at a point we all start thinking about accumulating assets, about having a cushion, about having, whether it's rainy day money, money for family education, or money for retirement. So the sooner you start focusing on making good choices there, the easier it will be, and the bigger the nest egg you will have. America has been very good to me and my family, and I want to spread the word that through financial literacy, you can accumulate both financial security, peace of mind, and move toward your financial goals.
Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent posting 3 videos. You heard them back to back on X. And finally, on C-SPAN Radio, an event from Saturday that we covered from State's newsroom reporting on the 30th anniversary of the deadliest act of domestic terrorism in U.S. history. Former President Bill Clinton said Americans must unite despite their differences, and that Oklahomans can help lead the way by serving as that role model for the rest of the nation. Clinton, who was president at the time of the attack, returned to the site of the 1995 Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building bombing Saturday to deliver the keynote address to a crowd of more than 1,600 who attended to remember and honor those who died and were injured in the attack. While the event is typically held outdoors at the Oklahoma City National Memorial and Museum site of the bombing, it was moved indoors due to inclement weather. The crowd that arrived to commemorate the anniversary was so large that once the pews were packed, people stood along the walls and filled an overflow room. That's reporting from State's newsroom. Here's part of former President Bill Clinton's speech.
In recent years, the country has grown more polarized. And on that awful day 30 years ago, you were the center of the polarization. Now look what you've built, and yet we have these differences. And it seems to me, I listen to this a lot because I'm old and I can't run for anything anymore. I always kid, I'm almost as old as President Trump. If you listen to a lot of what I read and hear today, it's like everybody's arguing about whose resentments matter most, whose resentments are more valid. When is it okay to stretch the truth a little bit to increase your advantage? If our lives are going to be dominated by the effort to dominate people we disagree with, we're going to put the 250-year-old march toward a more perfect union at risk. None of us would ever get much done. Believe me, we've all got something to be mad about. Something legitimate to be mad about. You made a different decision. So, my advice to America today is that we were there for you when you needed us. America needs you, and America needs the Oklahoma Standard. And if we all lived by it, we'd be a lot better off. We would get a fairer economy, a more stable society. We would understand one another, and we wouldn't feel weak if we admitted we were wrong about something. It does you good every now and then to admit you're wrong, you know. I do. This church would be out of business if nobody ever did anything wrong.
Former President Bill Clinton on Saturday at First Church in Oklahoma City on the 30th anniversary of the 1995 truck bomb terrorist attack on the Alfred Murrah Federal Building that killed 168 people, including 19 children, injuring hundreds more. Again, from the state's newsroom article on this ceremony, other speakers at Saturday's remembrance event included prominent Republican officials such as Oklahoma Governor Kevin Stitt, former Governor Frank Keating, and U.S. Senator James Langford. Oklahoma City Mayor David Holt also spoke. Most of Oklahoma's congressional delegation was present, as were a few other former governors, sitting state lawmakers, and other officials. And C-SPAN did cover it. You can find the full video at our website, cspan.org. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word, and you'll get the stories making headlines in Washington emailed to you every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.